My name is Sarah Mitchell, I'm 38, and until last month, I thought I knew everything about my family. For 15 years, I've been a devoted mother to my son Noah, building what I believed was a rock-solid life with my husband David. Then one night, out of nowhere, David looked at me and said, "I want a DNA test for Noah." I actually laughed at first, thinking it was some bizarre joke. But the results changed everything, just not in the way either of us could have imagined. If you've ever had your life turned upside down in an instant, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to follow my journey through the impossible. David and I met during sophomore year at NYU. He was the quiet finance major who always sat in the front row of our economics class, while I was the art student who only took the course to fulfill a requirement. We were opposites in many ways, but something clicked between us during a group project. After graduation, we dated for 2 years before he proposed on a weekend trip to Cape Cod. I was 24 when we married in a small ceremony surrounded by family and friends who all said we were perfect for each other. We settled in Connecticut, where David landed a position as a financial analyst at a prestigious firm. I worked as a graphic designer, eventually transitioning to freelance work from home. We bought a modest colonial in a good school district and spent weekends renovating it together, planning for the family we both desperately wanted. Everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. Until it wasn't. For 3 years, we tried to conceive without success. Each negative pregnancy test felt like a personal failure. We underwent fertility testing, tried various treatments, and even considered IVF, though our insurance wouldn't cover it. The strain began to affect our marriage. David became obsessed with timing and fertility charts, while I started to wonder if motherhood would ever be part of my story. Then, just as we were discussing adoption options, the miracle happened. I still remember the disbelief I felt staring at that positive test. David cried when I told him, the only time I'd seen him cry besides our wedding day. The pregnancy wasn't easy: severe morning sickness, gestational diabetes, and concerning blood pressure spikes in the final trimester, but nothing could dampen our joy. Noah came into the world on a chaotic night at Memorial Hospital. A severe thunderstorm had knocked out power, and the hospital was operating on generators with a reduced staff. I was in labor for 22 hours, ending in an emergency C-section when Noah showed signs of distress. The first time I held him, wrapped in a blue hospital blanket with just his tiny face peeking out, I felt a connection so profound it seemed impossible we had ever been separate beings. From the beginning, Noah was what the nurses called a mama's boy. He would calm instantly in my arms when he was fussy, but often continued crying with David. As he grew, our bond only strengthened. He was a sensitive child who sought me out for comfort, validation, and companionship. David sometimes joked that he felt like the third wheel in our relationship, but I could tell he was proud of the close bond his son and wife shared. Noah grew into an intelligent, creative boy with a particular talent for music. When he was 7, his elementary school music teacher called us in for a conference, not because of problems, but because she believed he had perfect pitch and remarkable aptitude. We started him on violin lessons, and his progress was astonishing. By 15, he was playing with the Regional Youth Symphony and talking about Juilliard as his dream school. Physically, Noah had always been a bit of a genetic mystery. He had thick, wavy brown hair that neither David's sandy blonde nor I, auburn, could claim credit for. His eyes were a striking deep blue, unlike David's hazel or my green. People often commented on these differences, usually with well-meaning but uncomfortable observations like, "He must take after a grandparent," or "Genetics are so fascinating, aren't they?" I never thought much about these comments. My father had dark hair before it turned gray, and my grandmother had blue eyes. David's family also had some blue-eyed members. I'd learned enough about genetics to know that traits can skip generations or emerge from recessive genes. Besides, Noah had my nose and David's chin dimple. He was clearly our son. David occasionally made offhand remarks about Noah's appearance over the years. "Where did he get that hair?" or "Those eyes definitely aren't from my side of the family." I always took these as simple observations, never suspecting a deeper concern. We were a happy family, active in our community, involved in Noah's school and activities, taking annual vacations to national parks or beach destinations. From the outside, and I thought from the inside too, we were the picture of suburban American success. Last summer, we took a trip to Florida to visit my parents, who had retired to Naples. We were at a beachside restaurant when an elderly woman at the next table struck up a conversation with us. After chatting pleasantly about the weather and local attractions, she looked at Noah and said, "Such a handsome young man. Interesting that he doesn't favor either of you, but that happens sometimes, doesn't it?" She meant no harm, but I noticed David stiffen beside me. That night, I caught him studying Noah's face as our son played video games, a strange, troubled expression on his own. When we returned home, David began spending more time at work, coming home late and going straight to his home office. He seemed distracted during family dinners, often staring at Noah with an intensity that made our son uncomfortable. "Dad, why are you looking at me like that? Do I have food on my face or something?" Noah would ask, trying to laugh off the scrutiny. David would shake his head and mutter something about being lost in thought. I tried to dismiss the changes in David's behavior as work stress or maybe even a midlife crisis. He had turned 40 that spring. Our life had always been stable, our relationship solid. It never occurred to me that he was harboring doubts that would soon shatter the foundation of everything we'd built together. The changes in David became impossible to ignore as summer turned to fall. He started coming home with old photo albums, flipping through pictures of Noah's childhood with an almost obsessive focus. One evening, I found him comparing baby photos of himself, me, and Noah, arranged side by side on his desk. When I asked what he was doing, he quickly closed the albums and claimed he was just feeling nostalgic. Using David's laptop one afternoon to print some work files, I noticed his browser history was filled with searches about genetic inheritance. Can two brown-haired parents have a child with black hair, genetic traits skipping generations, hereditary eye color patterns, and most alarmingly, signs your child might not be yours? My stomach dropped reading these, but I closed the browser without saying anything, unsure how to broach what was clearly becoming an issue for him. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. I was preparing dinner while Noah was at orchestra practice. David came home earlier than usual, hovering awkwardly in the kitchen doorway instead of his normal routine of changing clothes and checking mail. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice tight. I set down the knife I was using to chop vegetables and turned to face him. "What's going on, David? You've been acting strange for weeks now." He sank into a kitchen chair, avoiding my eyes. "I've been doing some thinking and research." "About what?" "About Noah." He paused, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, part accusation, part fear. "About whether he's really mine." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "Of course he's yours." "How can you even ask that?" "Is he, Sarah? Is he really?" "Because I've had doubts for years now, and they're getting harder to ignore." My hands began to shake. "Doubts based on what, exactly?" "He doesn't look like me." "He doesn't look like you either, not really. He has talents neither of us have. And sometimes—" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "Sometimes I wonder about that conference you went to in Chicago, right before you got pregnant." The accusation hung in the air between us. The conference he referred to had been a 3-day graphic design symposium. I'd gone alone because we couldn't afford for both of us to travel at the time. Nothing remotely inappropriate had happened there. I'd attended workshops during the day and called David from my hotel room each night. "Are you serious right now?" My voice rose. "You think I cheated on you 16 years ago and have been lying about it ever since? Based on what, Noah's eye color?" David's face hardened. "Tom Davidson just found out his 12-year-old daughter isn't his. His wife had an affair with their neighbor years ago and never told him. They did one of those ancestry DNA kits for fun, and it all came out. These things happen, Sarah. Not to us. Not to me." I was shouting now, anger and hurt overwhelming me. "I have never been unfaithful to you, not once in our entire marriage." "Then you won't mind doing a DNA test?" His voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. "To settle this once and for all." "I can't believe you're asking me this. 15 years of raising him together, and you want a DNA test? This is insane." If there's nothing to hide, there's no reason not to do it. I stormed out of the kitchen and locked myself in our bedroom, calling my sister Jessica through tears. After listening to my rage and heartbreak, she offered surprisingly practical advice. "Do the test, Sarah," she said gently. "If David has convinced himself of this narrative, no amount of arguing will change his mind. The results will prove him wrong, and then you can decide whether to forgive him for doubting you." "I shouldn't have to prove my faithfulness with a DNA test," I protested. "No, you shouldn't," Jessica agreed. "But if you want to save your marriage, this might be the only way." That night, after Noah was asleep, I confronted David again. "I'll agree to the test on one condition," I said coldly. "When it proves Noah is yours, you get therapy for whatever insecurity or midlife crisis is causing this paranoia. And you work to rebuild the trust you've broken." David nodded solemnly. "That's fair. And Sarah, I hope I'm wrong." "I really do." I turned away without responding. The fact that he could doubt me so fundamentally after 15 years of marriage had opened a wound I wasn't sure could heal, regardless of what any test showed. The next morning, I researched DNA paternity testing while David was in the shower. I discovered there were home test kits available, but given the sensitivity of our situation, I opted for testing through a medical facility with a certified lab. I wanted results that would be unquestionable, from professionals who could explain the science to David in terms he couldn't dismiss. I called a clinic recommended by our family doctor and scheduled appointments for the following week. When I told David, he seemed surprised I was moving so quickly but agreed to the timeline. The harder conversation was with Noah. We decided to tell him we needed genetic testing for health reasons, a partial truth that avoided introducing him to his father's suspicions. Noah was understandably confused. "But I'm not sick," he protested over breakfast. "Why do we need special doctor tests?" "It's preventative," I explained, hating the deception. "Sometimes certain conditions run in families, and knowing about them early can help doctors keep an eye out. It's nothing to worry about." Noah seemed to accept this explanation, though I caught him watching us with concern over the following days. Our home, once filled with music and comfortable conversation, became eerily quiet. David worked late most nights, and when he was home, he retreated to his office. I threw myself into freelance projects, staying up well past midnight to avoid going to bed at the same time as my husband. Noah, sensing the tension, spent more time in his room or at friends' houses. The drive to the clinic was excruciating. We sat in silence, David gripping the steering wheel too tightly, Noah in the back seat with his headphones on, me staring out the passenger window wondering how we'd reached this breaking point. The testing facility was clinical and impersonal. White walls, uncomfortable chairs, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sickly. We checked in at the front desk, and a technician called us back to separate rooms. The process itself was simple enough. Cheek swabs collected in sterile containers, labeled carefully, forms signed. The technician, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, seemed to sense the tension between us. As she finished processing Noah's sample and sent him back to the waiting room, she paused before collecting mine. "Is everything okay?" she asked quietly. I forced a smile. "Fine. Just routine testing." She nodded, clearly unconvinced, but professional enough not to pry further. "Results should be available in 10 to 14 business days. The doctor will call to schedule a follow-up appointment to review them with you." Those 2 weeks were among the longest of my life. David moved into the guest room without discussion, taking only what he needed from our bedroom in silent trips while I was working. We communicated only about logistics. Who would drive Noah to orchestra, what groceries were needed, bills that needed paying. The distance between us grew so vast I couldn't imagine how we'd ever bridge it, even after the test proved Noah was his. I fluctuated between rage at David's baseless accusation and fear that our marriage was irreparable. How could we come back from this level of distrust? What would we tell Noah if we couldn't fix things? How had David harbored these doubts for so long without ever discussing them with me? Noah, perceptive as always, knew something serious was happening despite our attempts to shield him. One evening, he found me alone in the kitchen and asked directly, "Are you and Dad getting a divorce?" The question broke my heart. No, honey. We're going through a rough patch, but we're working on it. Is it because of me? His voice was small, and I realized he'd overheard more than we thought. I pulled him into a fierce hug. Absolutely not. None of this is your fault, Noah. Your dad and I both love you more than anything in the world. Adult relationships are just complicated sometimes. He seemed only partially reassured, and I noticed him making special efforts in the following days, cleaning up without being asked, offering to help with dinner, playing pieces on his violin that he knew were David's favorites. My son was trying to fix our marriage, a burden no 15-year-old should carry. At night, alone in what had been our bedroom, I would often find myself unable to sleep, replaying memories of Noah's birth. The chaotic hospital, the exhaustion after nearly a full day of labor, the emergency C-section performed while the backup generators hummed in the background. I remembered the nurse placing a swaddled Noah in my arms in the recovery room, his tiny face red and scrunched, his eyes swollen slits that wouldn't reveal their blue color until days later. I remembered David crying as he held his son for the first time, whispering promises to protect and love him forever. Where had that man gone? How could he question whether that precious child was his after 15 years of bedtime stories, baseball games, homework help, and proud parent moments? 12 days after our tests, as I was preparing dinner, my phone rang with the clinic's number. Dr. Reynolds, the geneticist who had overseen our testing, asked if we could come in the following afternoon to discuss the results. My heart raced. Is everything okay? I asked, stepping away from the stove. Can't you just tell me the results now? I prefer to discuss genetic testing results in person, she replied, her professional tone revealing nothing. Is 3 o'clock tomorrow possible for you and your husband? I agreed to the appointment, then texted David. Clinic called. Results ready. Appointment tomorrow at 3. They wouldn't tell me anything over the phone. His response came quickly. I'll pick you up at 2:30. That night, I barely slept. Despite my absolute certainty about Noah's paternity, the doctor's insistence on an in-person meeting had planted a seed of anxiety. Why couldn't she just confirm what I knew to be true over the phone? What if something was actually wrong with Noah's health, and that's why she wanted to see us in person? By morning, I had convinced myself the tests had revealed some rare genetic condition that would threaten my son's future. Compared to that fear, David's paternity concerns seemed almost trivial. I just wanted my child to be healthy and safe. When David arrived to pick me up, I was surprised to see Noah in the back seat. I thought we'd go together, David explained awkwardly. As a family. I nodded, too nervous about what awaited us at the clinic to argue. Noah sat silently in the back, his expression suggesting he understood this appointment was more significant than we'd initially let on. None of us could have prepared for what we were about to learn. The waiting room at the clinic seemed even more sterile and tense than during our first visit. Noah sat between David and me, fidgeting with his phone but clearly aware of the heavy silence connecting his parents like a live wire. When the receptionist called our name, we all stood as if programmed, following her down a hallway to Dr. Reynolds' office. Dr. Reynolds was a slender woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She greeted us with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, gesturing for us to take the 3 chairs arranged before her desk. I noticed she had a thick folder open in front of her and a concerned expression that instantly accelerated my heartbeat. Thank you for coming in today, Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, Noah, she began, her voice measured. As I mentioned on the phone, I prefer to discuss genetic testing results in person, especially when there are unexpected findings that may require further explanation. David leaned forward slightly. So there is something unexpected? Dr. Reynolds nodded, glancing briefly at Noah before returning her attention to us. Before I share the specific results, I want to provide some context about genetic testing and what it can tell us about biological relationships. She explained how DNA testing works, the markers they look for to establish paternity, and the statistical certainty of their findings. I found myself growing impatient with the science lesson, wanting her to get to the point, to confirm what I already knew and end this needless strain on our family. Dr. Reynolds, I interrupted finally, we understand the basics. Could you please just tell us the results? My husband has questioned whether he's Noah's biological father, and we need to resolve this. Noah's head snapped toward me, his face registering shock and hurt at my blunt statement. I immediately regretted my words, but couldn't take them back. Dr. Reynolds took a deep breath. Mr. Mitchell, the test confirms that you are, without question, Noah's biological father. I felt a rush of vindication and turned to David, expecting to see relief or perhaps shame on his face. Instead, he looked confused. However, Dr. Reynolds continued, her voice gentler now. The test also indicates that Mrs. Mitchell is not Noah's biological mother. The words seemed to hang in the air, incomprehensible. I felt a rushing in my ears, the room tilting slightly. That's impossible, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I carried him. I gave birth to him. There's been a mistake with the test. Dr. Reynolds shook her head. We ran the analysis 3 times to confirm. The results are conclusive. Noah is biologically related to Mr. Mitchell, but not to you, Mrs. Mitchell. I gripped the arms of my chair, suddenly dizzy. You need to sit down, Dr. Reynolds said with concern, before realizing I was already seated. Mom? Noah's voice cracked, his face pale. What does she mean you're not my biological mother? You're my mom. I reached for him instinctively, pulling him against me as I had thousands of times since he was placed in my arms as a newborn. Of course I'm your mother. I've always been your mother. There's been a mistake with the test. Dr. Reynolds cleared her throat. While testing errors are possible, they're extremely rare with our protocols. The most likely explanation, given the circumstances, is that there was a mix-up at the hospital when Noah was born. David, who had been silent until now, found his voice. A mix-up? You mean, our biological child went home with another family, and we brought home someone else's child? The doctor nodded gravely. It appears that way. Hospital mix-ups are rare but not unheard of, especially during unusual circumstances like what you described, a power outage, reduced staff, multiple births occurring close together. Noah pulled away from me, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. So you're not my real mom? I belong to some other family. No, I said fiercely, taking his face in my hands. Listen to me, Noah. I am your real mom. I have been since the day you were born. Biology doesn't change that. Nothing could change that. Dr. Reynolds intervened gently. Noah, family is created in many ways. The people who raise you, who love you and care for you, they're your real parents in every way that matters day to day. This information doesn't change your family, it just adds a layer of complexity to your story. David had gone pale, his earlier suspicions replaced by a new, more profound shock. I accused you, he whispered, looking at me with dawning horror. All this time, I thought you had. He couldn't finish the sentence. I know what you thought, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice despite my own shock. Dr. Reynolds recommended we speak with a genetic counselor and a therapist specializing in family identity issues. She provided a folder of resources and suggested we take some time to process the information before making any decisions about next steps. Some families in your situation choose to search for their biological child, while others decide that knowing the truth is enough, she explained. There's no right or wrong choice, only what feels right for your family. As we left the clinic, Noah walked between us, occasionally glancing up as if seeing us, seeing me, with new eyes. In the car, the silence was deafening until Noah spoke. Does this mean I have another mom and dad somewhere? And you guys have another kid? The simple, logical question from my son, because he was still my son, regardless of DNA, broke something open inside me. Tears began streaming down my face as David pulled into a park instead of heading home, clearly recognizing none of us were in a state to return to normal life. It means there was a mistake at the hospital, David explained, turning to face Noah in the back seat. But your mom is right. She's been your mother in every way that matters since the day you were born. This doesn't change who we are as a family. But aren't you curious about your your biological kid? Noah pressed. I wiped my tears, trying to collect myself. Of course we are. But that doesn't mean we would trade you for anyone, Noah. You are our son. Period. As we sat in that car, each lost in our own thoughts, I realized our family story had just become infinitely more complicated. Somewhere out there was a child I had carried for 9 months, had never known, and who had been raised by strangers. And Noah, my beautiful, talented boy who had been my whole heart for 15 years, had another mother who might not even know he existed. The ground beneath our family had shifted permanently, and I had no idea what the new landscape would look like. That night was the longest of my life. After putting a confused and emotionally exhausted Noah to bed with assurances of our unwavering love, David and I sat at our kitchen table in stunned silence. The implications of what we'd learned were still sinking in, creating ripples of questions neither of us was prepared to answer. "I don't know where to start," David finally said, his voice hoarse. "Sarah, I am so sorry for what I accused you of. I can't believe I held up my hand, cutting him off. "We'll deal with that later. Right now, we need to figure out what this means for Noah. For all of us." While David made coffee, I opened my laptop and began researching hospital mix-ups. The stories I found were both comforting and terrifying. Other families who had discovered similar truths, some decades after their children were born. Legal battles, emotional reunions, identity crises, and occasionally, beautiful expanded family relationships. "It's rare, but it happens," I told David as he set a mug in front of me. "Especially during emergencies or unusual circumstances, like the power outage during Noah's birth. What do we do now? Do we try to find the other child?" David couldn't quite bring himself to say, "our biological child," but I understood what he meant. "I think we have to," I replied. "Not just for us, but for Noah. He'll have questions about his genetic background eventually, especially for medical reasons. And somewhere out there is a child who shares our DNA but has never met us." I couldn't sleep that night. Instead, I pulled out our family photo albums and began going through them chronologically. Noah as a newborn, his face still swollen from birth. Noah taking his first steps, David hovering anxiously behind him with outstretched arms. Noah on his first day of kindergarten, proudly wearing a backpack almost as big as he was. Each photo represented a real moment, a real memory, a real bond that no DNA test could erase. Yet now each image also carried a new question. What did our biological child look like at this age? Who captured their first steps, their first day of school? Did they have David's dimpled smile or my green eyes? Were they loved as completely as we had loved Noah? The next morning, after making sure Noah got on the school bus, with extra hugs and reassurances, I called Memorial Hospital. Getting information proved more difficult than I expected. The hospital administrator I spoke with was professionally sympathetic but evasive when I mentioned a possible baby switch. "That's a very serious allegation, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm not seeing any incident reports from that time period that would indicate such an event." "Of course you don't," I replied, frustration mounting. "If the staff realized what happened, we wouldn't be having this conversation 15 years later. I need information about other births that occurred around the same time as my son's. I'm afraid patient confidentiality prevents me from sharing that information," she responded. "However, I can connect you with our patient advocate who might be able to guide you through the proper channels." The patient advocate was similarly unhelpful, suggesting I consult an attorney before proceeding. Taking her advice, I researched lawyers specializing in medical malpractice and found Miranda Frost, whose website mentioned specific experience with hospital errors including misidentification cases. In her sleek downtown office the following day, Miranda listened intently as David and I explained our situation. Unlike the hospital staff, she didn't seem surprised. "Unfortunately, these cases are more common than hospitals want to admit," she said, making notes on a legal pad. "The good news is that with DNA confirmation already in hand, we have a strong starting position. The challenge will be identifying the other family involved." She outlined our options: file a lawsuit against the hospital to force disclosure of records, hire a private investigator to identify potential matches, or submit our DNA to public genealogy databases in hopes of finding relatives of Noah's biological mother. "I recommend we start with legal pressure on the hospital," Miranda advised. "With the threat of a lawsuit for negligence, they'll likely become more cooperative about searching their records. Her prediction proved correct. Within a week of receiving Miranda's formal letter, the hospital's legal team agreed to an internal investigation. Their records confirmed what we already suspected. During the power outage on the night of Noah's birth, only one other baby boy had been delivered, just 40 minutes after Noah. Ethan Carter, Miranda told us during a conference call. Born to Lisa and Michael Carter. The hospital is working on getting contact information, but they believe the family relocated to Oregon several years ago. The name sent a chill through me. Somewhere in Oregon was a 15-year-old boy named Ethan who, if the hospital's theory was correct, had my DNA, my biological connection. A child I had carried but never known. David, who had been quieter than usual since the test results, finally voiced what we were both thinking. What if they don't want to know? What if telling them destroys their family the way this nearly destroyed ours? It was a valid concern. The Carters had raised Ethan as their son for 15 years, just as we had raised Noah. Learning the truth would upend their world just as it had ours. We need to proceed carefully, Miranda agreed. But medical history alone is a compelling reason for disclosure. Both families deserve to know their children's genetic backgrounds. While Miranda worked on locating the Carters, David and I focused on supporting Noah, who was struggling to process the revelation. We arranged sessions with Dr. Winters, a family therapist specializing in identity issues, who suggested we all attend both individually and as a family. During one private session, I broke down completely. I've always felt this incredible connection to Noah, I sobbed. From the moment they placed him in my arms. How is that possible if he's not biologically mine? Dr. Winters offered a gentle smile. Biology is just one way we connect with our children. The bond you feel with Noah was created through years of nurturing, caring, loving. It's real and valid, regardless of genetics. Those sessions helped, but Noah still had difficult moments. One night, I found him in his room, surrounded by family photos. "Do you think my biological mom plays violin too?" he asked, looking up at me with tears in his eyes. "Is that where my music comes from?" I sat beside him on the bed. "It's possible. And maybe someday we can find out. But you know what? Your talent isn't just about genetics. It's about all those hours you practiced, all the lessons you attended, all the passion you put into learning. That's all you, Noah." He leaned against me, the way he had since he was small. "I'm scared, Mom. What if my biological parents want me back?" "Oh, honey," I pulled him close. "That's not how this works. You're 15, not a baby. No one can take you back. You're our son legally and in every way that matters. Nothing will change that." At home, David was working through his own complicated emotions. One evening, after Noah had gone to bed, he broke down. "I spent years secretly doubting you, looking at our son and wondering if you had betrayed me," he said, voice thick with shame. "I let that poison our marriage, made you feel accused and untrusted. And all along, the truth was something neither of us could have imagined." I wanted to stay angry. Part of me felt entitled to that anger after what he'd put us through. But seeing him so broken, so genuinely remorseful, I found my rage giving way to something more complex. "We need to move forward," I told him. "For Noah's sake, if nothing else. He needs us united right now." 3 weeks after Miranda sent her letter to the hospital, we received the news. She had located the Carter family in Portland, Oregon. Michael Carter worked as an engineer for a tech company there. Lisa was a teacher. And their son Ethan was a sophomore in high school, just like Noah. Miranda made the initial contact through a carefully worded letter explaining that we had information regarding their son that had significant medical implications. She purposely avoided mentioning the hospital mix-up in writing, suggesting instead a phone call to discuss the sensitive matter. Lisa Carter's call came on a Sunday afternoon. I had rehearsed what I might say dozens of times, but when I heard her voice, the voice of the woman who had raised my biological child for 15 years, all my prepared words vanished. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, her tone wary. "Your lawyer sent us a letter about Ethan. Is he all right? Has something happened to him?" No, I assured her quickly. "Ethan is fine, as far as I know. This is complicated. Are you somewhere private where you can talk?" "You're scaring me," she said. Please just tell me what this is about. Taking a deep breath, I explained as gently as I could about the DNA test, the discovery that Noah was not my biological son but was David's, and the hospital's confirmation of only 2 boys born that night. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came a sound that broke my heart, Lisa Carter's muffled sob. "This is ridiculous," she finally said, her voice hardened with denial. "Ethan is our son. I gave birth to him. There's been a mistake with your test." I recognized her reaction. It mirrored my own initial response. "I understand how you feel, Mrs. Carter." I said the same thing. "But the hospital has confirmed there were only 2 baby boys born that night, during a power outage with emergency staffing. The odds are overwhelming that what? That the child I've raised for 15 years isn't mine." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry for whatever you're going through, Mrs. Mitchell, but Ethan is our son." "I understand," I said softly. "But wouldn't you want to know for certain? For Ethan's medical history, if nothing else." There was another long pause before she spoke again. "I need to discuss this with my husband. This isn't something I can decide on my own." "Of course. Take all the time you need. But please consider doing a DNA test. If nothing else, it will put this matter to rest one way or another." After we hung up, I sat motionless, overwhelmed by the conversation. The pain in Lisa Carter's voice had been so raw, so familiar. She was at the beginning of a journey I had started just weeks earlier, the shocking possibility that the child she had loved and raised might not be biologically hers. 2 days later, Michael Carter called. His tone was more measured than his wife's had been, but I could hear the strain beneath his control. "We've discussed your concerns," he said. "While we believe there's been a mistake, we agree it would be best to confirm that with a test, if only to put this matter behind us. How do we proceed?" Miranda arranged for the Carters to have DNA testing done at a clinic in Portland, with the results sent directly to our geneticist in Connecticut. The waiting period was excruciating, not just for us, but for Noah, who now understood we were trying to locate his biological mother and possibly our biological son. During those 2 weeks, I found myself staring at strangers' children, wondering if my biological child had my green eyes, my auburn hair, my tendency to talk with my hands. David, who had been sleeping in the guest room since his accusation, gradually moved back into our bedroom, both of us finding comfort in facing this surreal situation together. When Dr. Reynolds called with the results, her voice was gentle but firm. "The tests confirm it. Ethan Carter is the biological child of you and Mr. Mitchell. And by extension, Noah is the biological child of the Carters." Reality, which had been tilting on its axis since our first visit to the clinic, finally settled into its new configuration. Somewhere in Portland was a boy with my DNA, my biological son, being raised by strangers. And the boy I had raised, had loved fiercely for 15 years, had come from another woman's womb. Neither fact changed my love for Noah, but both would forever alter the course of all our lives. Arranging a meeting between our families was delicate. After the DNA confirmation, the Carters had gone through their own period of shock and denial. Lisa had been particularly resistant, according to Michael's updates during our increasingly frequent phone calls. "She feels like her motherhood is being questioned," he explained during one conversation. "Like someone's trying to take Ethan away from her." "I understand completely," I told him, because I did. "I felt the same way about Noah. Please tell her we have no intention of disrupting your family. We just want to know our biological son, and for the boys to understand their medical histories." After numerous calls, emails, and video chats between the adults, we agreed to meet in person at a hotel conference room in Chicago, neutral territory halfway between Connecticut and Oregon. We arranged for a family therapist specializing in adoption and identity issues to be present, hoping to make the introduction as smooth as possible for both boys. The day of the meeting, I could barely eat. Noah was uncharacteristically quiet, fidgeting with his phone but not really using it. David kept checking and rechecking our flight details, his anxiety manifesting as excessive preparation. "What if he doesn't like us?" Noah asked suddenly as our plane began its descent into O'Hare. "What if Ethan thinks this whole thing is weird and wants nothing to do with any of us?" I squeezed his hand. Then we respect his feelings and give him time. This is a lot for everyone to process. The hotel conference room was arranged with comfortable seating areas rather than formal tables and chairs, a suggestion from the therapist, Dr. Bennett, who greeted us warmly when we arrived 30 minutes early. I've spoken with both families separately, she explained. The Carters should be here shortly. Remember, there's no right or wrong way to feel about this meeting. Everyone's emotions are valid, and we'll take things at whatever pace feels comfortable. I nodded, too nervous to speak. My biological son, a child I had carried for 9 months, but never known, was about to walk through that door. Would I recognize something of myself in him? Would there be an instant connection, some primal recognition between biological mother and child? Or would he feel like a stranger? The door opened, and 3 people entered, a tall man with sandy hair and glasses, a petite woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and, between them, a teenage boy with familiar green eyes that stopped me cold. My eyes. David's dimpled chin. A perfect genetic blend of us that I had imagined but never seen. Time seemed to stand still as our families stared at each other across the room. Noah pressed closer to my side, while Ethan remained half-hidden behind Lisa Carter, eyeing us warily. Dr. Bennett broke the silence. Why don't we all sit down? Michael, Lisa, Ethan, meet Sarah, David, and Noah. We moved awkwardly to the seating area, the boys positioning themselves beside their respective mothers. I couldn't stop looking at Ethan, at his auburn hair that matched mine exactly, at the way he bit his lower lip when nervous, just as I did. David, too, seemed transfixed, his eyes moving between Ethan and Noah as if seeing both boys clearly for the first time. This is weird, Noah said finally, breaking the tension. A nervous laugh rippled through the group. Definitely weird, Ethan agreed, and something in his voice, the inflection, the slight sarcastic edge, was so familiar it made my chest ache. It was like hearing myself in male teenage form. Dr. Bennett guided us through initial introductions, encouraging each person to share a little about themselves. We learned that Ethan played baseball and was interested in engineering. Like his father, like Michael, I corrected myself mentally. Noah spoke about his violin and his dreams of Juilliard. Do either of you play instruments? Noah asked the Carters hesitantly. Lisa shook her head. Neither of us are musical at all. We always wondered where Ethan's talent came from. I play? Ethan asked, looking surprised. Piano, Lisa said. Since you were 6. You're quite good, though you don't practice as much as you should. I felt a jolt of recognition. Music was in his DNA too, just expressed differently. As the initial awkwardness began to ease, we shared photos, baby pictures, school portraits, family vacations. It was surreal seeing Ethan grow up through their family albums, this boy who looked so much like David and me but had been raised in a completely different environment. He was always so determined, Lisa said, showing us a picture of Ethan taking his first steps. Once he decided to do something, there was no stopping him. Noah was the same way, I replied. He taught himself to read before kindergarten because he was tired of waiting for us to read to him. We discovered other similarities. Both boys were allergic to shellfish. Both were night owls rather than early risers. Both had an uncanny ability to remember song lyrics after hearing them just once. Nature versus nurture was playing out before our eyes in these 2 boys who shared no environment but had identical genetics. The conversation inevitably turned to the harder questions. Michael brought up the legal aspects first. Our lawyer has reviewed the situation, he said cautiously. She says at this point, there's no question of changing custody or legal parentage. The boys are 15, not infants. We have no desire to disrupt either family, David assured them. Our only concern is making sure both boys have what they need going forward. Medically, emotionally, whatever support helps them process this situation. Lisa, who had been quieter than the others, finally addressed the elephant in the room. I've been terrified since your lawyer contacted us, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Terrified that you would try to take Ethan from us. That the law might somehow decide blood is all that matters after 15 years. I moved to sit beside her, taking her hand in mine. Lisa, I understand that fear because I felt it too. Noah is my son in every way that matters, regardless of DNA. I would never try to take Ethan from the only parents he's ever known, and I know you feel the same about Noah. Tears filled her eyes. He's my baby. From the first moment they placed him in my arms. I know, I said, my own eyes welling up. That's exactly how I feel about Noah. In that moment, something shifted between us. A recognition of our shared experience, our shared love for children who weren't biologically ours, but were ours in all the ways that mattered day to day. The boys, who had been listening to this exchange, looked at each other with new understanding. So, you're not trying to switch us back or something? Ethan asked bluntly. No, all four parents answered simultaneously, then laughed at the unified response. You're both exactly where you belong, David added. This isn't about changing your lives. It's about expanding your understanding of where you came from. As the day progressed, we discussed practical matters, sharing medical histories, establishing boundaries for ongoing contact, deciding what to tell extended family members. The initial plan was for occasional video calls and perhaps visits during school breaks if the boys were comfortable with the idea. The most poignant moment came near the end of our meeting, when Noah asked if he could play something on the piano in the corner of the conference room. He'd never shown much interest in piano, focusing all his musical energy on violin, but something in the day's revelations seemed to have sparked his curiosity. Ethan joined him on the bench, showing him a simple melody. Within minutes, Noah had not only mastered it, but begun improvising around it. Ethan watched in amazement, then started adding his own embellishments. The resulting duet was rough but harmonious, a musical conversation between two boys discovering a shared language. Watching them, I felt David's arm slip around my waist. They're going to be okay, he whispered. All of us are. I wasn't sure I fully believed it yet, but in that moment, seeing Noah and Ethan tentatively building a connection, I allowed myself to hope he was right. As we prepared to leave, exchanging contact information and making plans for a video call the following weekend, Lisa pulled me aside. I've been so angry since we found out, she confessed. Not at you, but at the situation. At the hospital. At the universe for doing this to us. I understand, I told her. I've cycled through every emotion imaginable. But today, seeing you with Ethan, how you let him come to you at his own pace, how you didn't try to force a connection. She paused, gathering herself. I realized something important. Our boys got exactly the mothers they needed, even if it wasn't the way nature intended. Her words stayed with me on the flight home, through the following days as we settled back into our routines, through the first awkward video calls between our newly expanded families. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps in the chaos of that stormy night 15 years ago, some cosmic force had ensured each boy went home with the family that would nurture him best. Or perhaps it was simpler than that, two families who had loved their children completely, regardless of biological connection, now finding a way to create something new and uncharted together. 6 months after our first meeting with the Carters, I stood in our kitchen watching Noah and Ethan making elaborate sandwiches together, talking over each other and laughing at inside jokes I wasn't privy to. The Carters had flown in for a week-long visit, our third in-person meeting since discovering the truth. The path to this comfortable scene hadn't been straightforward. Those first few months after the revelation had been filled with awkward video calls, careful negotiations about boundaries, and occasional emotional setbacks for all involved. There were days when Noah refused to talk about Ethan or the Carters, days when Ethan apparently did the same according to Lisa's texts. Times when I caught myself staring at photos of Ethan, searching for more similarities, and feeling guilty for my curiosity. David and I had spent many late nights discussing how to navigate this unprecedented situation. Our marriage, which had nearly fractured under the weight of his false suspicions, had gradually strengthened as we faced this challenge together. The couples therapy we started after the DNA test results helped us process not just the hospital mix-up, but the years of subtle doubt that had preceded it. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive myself, David had admitted during one session. Not just for doubting Sarah, but for keeping those doubts secret for so long. For letting them poison how I saw our family. The forgiveness isn't just about the accusation, I replied. It's about rebuilding trust. I need to know that you see me clearly now, that you believe in my commitment to our marriage. Slowly, tentatively, we found our way back to each other. The crisis that could have destroyed us instead forced us to communicate more honestly than we had in years. We established a new tradition of Sunday morning coffee on our porch, just the two of us, talking about whatever was on our minds without distraction. Noah's journey had been equally complex. After the initial shock, he went through periods of intense curiosity about his biological parents, followed by times when he seemed to reject the whole situation. "They're nice and everything," he told me after our second visit with the Carters, "but they don't feel like my parents." "You and Dad are my parents." "We always will be," I assured him. Getting to know the Carters doesn't change that. Other times, he was full of questions about Lisa and Michael, eager to understand the genetic connections that might explain aspects of himself he'd never understood before. "Lisa gets migraines too," he told me one day. "And she hates cilantro, just like me. You and Dad both love it, which never made sense before." I nodded, swallowing the small pang that accompanied these revelations. It was natural for him to seek these connections, to better understand his biological origins. It didn't diminish our bond, I reminded myself repeatedly. To help Noah process his feelings, I wrote him a letter, pouring out everything in my heart about what motherhood had meant to me. "Biology created you," I wrote, "but love made you my son. From the first moment I held you, you were mine to protect, to nurture, to guide through this world. Nothing, not DNA, not hospital mix-ups, not the existence of another family, can change the fact that I am your mother in all the ways that have shaped your life and mine." Noah kept that letter in his desk drawer. I'd seen him reading it several times in the months since, usually after difficult days or emotional conversations about our unusual family situation. The legal aspects had been complex but ultimately manageable. Our lawsuit against Memorial Hospital was settled out of court, with the hospital acknowledging the error and providing a substantial settlement to both families. The funds were placed in trusts for both boys' education, ensuring they would have financial support for college and beyond. We opted not to pursue criminal charges against any hospital staff. As our lawyer explained, the employees involved had likely long since moved on, and proving individual negligence 15 years later would be nearly impossible. More importantly, both families agreed that focusing on punishment wouldn't help our sons move forward. Now, watching Noah and Ethan together in our kitchen, I marveled at how quickly they had formed a connection. They weren't quite brothers in the traditional sense, but they weren't merely friends either. They had created their own category of relationship, part genetic curiosity, part shared unusual experience, part genuine affinity for each other. "They're thick as thieves," Michael commented, joining me in the doorway. "Ethan's been talking about nothing but this visit for weeks." "Noah too," I smiled. He cleared his schedule of all his regular activities to maximize Ethan time, as he calls it. Michael hesitated, then added quietly, "Lisa wanted me to tell you, she's grateful for how you've handled all this." "We both are. You could have made this so much harder." "We all could have," I acknowledged. "I think we're lucky that everyone involved wanted what was best for the boys, not just what would be easiest for the adults." Our conversation was interrupted by David and Lisa returning from the grocery store, arms laden with supplies for the evening's barbecue. The easy camaraderie between them was still surprising to me. They had bonded over shared interests in hiking and photography, developing a friendship independent of the circumstances that had brought our families together. That night, as both families gathered around our backyard table, I took a moment to absorb the scene. Noah teaching Ethan a complicated hand-clapping game they'd invented, David and Michael discussing plans for a potential joint family vacation next summer, Lisa showing me photos of Ethan's recent piano recital on her phone. None of this would have existed 6 months ago. None of it would have seemed possible. "You know what's really weird?" Noah said suddenly, looking up from his plate. "When people see us all together, they automatically assume Ethan and I are brothers." "Aren't you?" Lisa asked with gentle curiosity. "Maybe not in the conventional sense, but in a way that matters?" Noah considered this, glancing at Ethan. "Yeah, I guess we are. Not twin brothers obviously, since we look nothing alike. But something. Genetic brothers, Ethan suggested with his characteristic directness. Birth-swapped brothers. Cosmic brothers, Noah countered with a grin, and the term somehow stuck, becoming part of our emerging family vocabulary. Later that week, a neighbor who didn't know our story spotted Noah and Ethan shooting baskets in our driveway and commented on Noah's basketball skills. He definitely didn't get that from me, I laughed. I was terrible at sports. He must have his mother's determination, though, the neighbor replied, watching Noah persistently trying a difficult shot. That's a quality that matters more than natural talent. I felt a rush of emotion at her words. She had no idea how accurate and yet inaccurate her observation was. Noah didn't have my genetic makeup, but he had grown up watching me persevere through challenges, had absorbed that quality through 15 years of daily example rather than DNA. As the months passed, our unusual extended family continued to define its own boundaries and traditions. We celebrated holidays separately, but established a tradition of a joint spring break trip. The boys texted daily and video called weekly. Lisa and I spoke regularly, sharing parenting strategies and supporting each other through the ongoing adjustments. The media got wind of our story eventually. Hospital mix-ups make compelling human interest stories, but we agreed as a group to decline interviews and protect the boys' privacy. A few local outlets ran small pieces, but without our participation, interest quickly faded. I did, however, find an online support group for parents of switched babies. Though rare, there were enough cases worldwide to form a small community. Sharing experiences with others who truly understood our unique situation provided comfort during difficult moments, and I found myself offering guidance to families whose discoveries were more recent than ours. On Noah's 16th birthday, we had a small party at home, just our immediate family and his closest friends. The Carters sent a gift and called to wish him well. After the celebration, Noah asked for a private moment with David and me. "I've been thinking about something," he said, uncharacteristically serious. "About my name." My heart sank. Was he considering taking the Carter surname? It would be understandable, a way to acknowledge his biological heritage, but the thought still hurt. "I want to keep Mitchell," he continued, sensing my concern. "You're my parents. But I was wondering if we could add Carter as a middle name, to recognize that part of who I am too." The request was so reasonable, so mature, that I felt tears spring to my eyes. "Noah Carter Mitchell," I tested the name aloud. "It has a nice ring to it." "We can get the paperwork started whenever you're ready," David added, his voice thick with emotion. Noah nodded, relief evident on his face. "Thanks for understanding. And for everything. I know this hasn't been easy for any of us." That night, after Noah went to bed, David and I sat on our back porch, looking at the stars. "Did you ever imagine our family would look like this?" he asked, taking my hand. "Never," I admitted. "But I'm starting to think that families rarely turn out exactly as we imagine them. They grow and change in unexpected ways." "I'm sorry I ever doubted you," David said, the apology he had offered countless times since the test results. "If I hadn't, we might never have known the truth." "That's the irony, isn't it?" I squeezed his hand. "Your worst suspicion led to a truth so much stranger than either of us could have imagined." 1 year after our first DNA test, both families gathered at a lakeside cabin for a weekend together. Watching the sunset over the water, Noah and Ethan skipping stones at the shoreline, I reflected on how far we had all come. The pain and shock of discovery had gradually given way to a new normal. One with more complexity, but also more richness than I could have anticipated. Lisa joined me on the dock, handing me a mug of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how life can change completely in an instant," I replied. "One doctor's appointment, one test result, and suddenly everything you thought you knew is different." She nodded, understanding without further explanation. "Do you ever wonder about that night? At the hospital? How exactly it happened?" I had wondered, of course. We all had. The hospital investigation had revealed understaffing during the power outage, with one nurse handling multiple newborns. Both boys had been temporarily placed in the same nursery area, their identity bands apparently switched in the chaos. A simple human error with life-altering consequences. Sometimes, I admitted. but I've made peace with not knowing the exact details. What matters more is how we've handled the aftermath. I agree, Lisa said. Though I still have moments of anger about it. Don't you? Less often now, I told her honestly. It's hard to stay angry when I look at Noah and see what an amazing person he's become. Would he be the same person if he'd been raised by you and Michael? Would Ethan be who he is if David and I had raised him? We'll never know. Nature and nurture, all mixed up, Lisa mused. Our boys got a different nurture than biology intended, but they're both thriving. Maybe that's the lesson in all this, that love matters more than DNA. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I called the boys in from the shore. Gathered around the cabin's fireplace that evening, our unconventional family shared stories, played games, and built new memories together. Noah and Ethan performed a duet they had been practicing, Noah on violin, Ethan on piano, the music flowing between them in perfect harmony. Looking around at these people who had become so important to us through the strangest of circumstances, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey hadn't been easy, and we still had challenges ahead as both boys navigated adolescence and eventually adulthood with their unusual origin story. But we had found a way forward together, redefining what family meant on our own terms. Biology had connected us, but love and choice had transformed that connection into something meaningful. In the end, isn't that what makes any family real? What does family mean to you? Is it defined by blood, by love, by shared experience, or something else entirely? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If our story touched you or made you think differently about what makes a family, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through life's unexpected challenges. And if you know someone struggling with their own family complexities, consider sharing this with them. Sometimes knowing others have navigated difficult waters can provide the hope we all need. Thank you for being part of our journey.